Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. Firstly, it's such a great honor for us to produce the international edition of Wenhua. Obviously, Tings and I are on the editorial board with editor Yan Ping of the international issue, but Shiran over there is also a key member of the team. Grace over there has the book review in this issue. Grace is not going to wave. I don't know why, but she should. And in the translation booth, Ines translates the text into Portuguese, Spanish. Yeah. And, Anthony should be doing some of the work too, but he has enough on his plate. Okay. This is a terrific issue because it really undercuts some people's thinking that Trump is good for the world. That idea that Trump is an accelerant for change is a very dangerous idea. And we have some superb essays that crush that basically into the dust, led by your opening editorial. I have to admit that I wrote this because I was invited to South Korea some years ago to an art gallery to talk about Asian art. And I thought, well, is there really an Asian art? Is Asian art possible? Is there something about Asian art? So the methodology I pursued philosophically was to immediately take all the artists in Asia who largely produce for the Western consumer market and cut them out of my sample. So they were not interesting to me because it seemed to me that they were merely postmodernizing themselves for the marketplace. And I was interested in, at the time, more plebeian art, art produced in marketplaces and art produced by people, at the time, long before the anti-poverty campaign, but next year we'll be publishing a text about the art that comes out of the eradication of poverty campaign. Poor people making art for themselves rather than for the Western market. And I looked at Indonesian work and Indian work and some Central Asian artists, Iranians, some Chinese artists, and I found there were actually some pretty amazing similarities. One of them was an incredible celebration of color, that there was a vast use of color, red, orange, bright colors. The colors both of nature and of festivals, very much there in all the art. In Iran, the painters, they just throw the art or the color on. Then I found that there was a lot of sincerity in the paintings. This was not cynical, postmodern, it was extremely sincere, like people sincerely portraying nature or sincerely trying to portray life of people in a city. Sometimes comical, like a little bit like cartoon art even, but extremely sincere. And I found that very interesting. And then there were remnants of socialist realism. The old national liberation, socialist realism school still seemed pretty alive and well. Anyway, I went to South Korea thinking, well, if you throw out the artists producing for Europe and the United States market, then perhaps there is an Asian art. And, people were like, well, you can't throw them out because they are also Asian art. In fact, the most famous of Asian artists are those. Ai Weiwei is a good example. And, we had a nice discussion. Then when I left and reflected more on the concept of Asia, I thought this is a peculiarity. And I want to share some observations about, first, why I think politically there's a block to Asia, then to pick up on Yan Ping's comments about the economics of unity, and then finally to talk about a modest version of unity. And I really hope you'll read and engage with this text and argue with it and let me know what you think, because it is a provocation. It's not a, it's a history of attempts to create an Asia. It's in that sense, it's looking back to look forward. Yeah? Which is really what history should be. Looking back to look forward, not just looking back for its sake. And in this story, one of my great heroes, who is not a Marxist, definitely not a communist, but is an incredible person who can grasp his time beautifully. And that was the poet and painter Rabindranath Tagore. He was an extraordinary person, who was neglected by the left, I think, to our peril. He wrote one of the finest critiques of nationalism, published in 1916, called Nationalism. He had an essay warning about Japanese militarism long before anybody saw it. He went to Tokyo, gave a speech, and warned Japanese intellectuals about where their nationalism was going. He's an extraordinary person, totally neglected by people on the left. And I recommend him a lot. So anyway, read the text. There are some real fissures today in Asia that are impediments to an Asian type unity. Perhaps the most spectacular fissure is that between India and China. The contestation between India and China since the actual border conflict in 1962 has really divided attempts to bring the continent together. And I would say there can be no advance for Asian unity as long as India and China have this hostility. And because in some way that India and China haven't cleared the deck, India and Pakistan continue to have hostility. This is actually a subsidiary of the India-China problem, the India-Pakistan problem. Now, interestingly, India has a problem with its neighbors Nepal and Bangladesh. Sometimes even Sri Lanka. Yeah? Pakistan doesn't have a defined border with Afghanistan. Afghanistan and Pakistan have a hostile relationship with each other. Last year, Pakistan and Iran fired missiles at each other over, again, a dissident group on the border. Yeah? I mean, look at the map in Asia. There was a very hot conflict taking place just a few months ago in Southeast Asia. The war in Myanmar could actually, any day now, draw in Thailand, Bangladesh, maybe Cambodia, etc. Incredibly volatile situation. And I'm not even talking about the United States in the Pacific. I'm ignoring that. I'm ignoring Japan and the Koreas and all of that. We have our own problems. Like, I don't really believe that the India-China problem can be placed at the doorstep of Washington. This is a Delhi-Beijing problem, which has to be solved. And interestingly, the solution to this might come for pragmatic economic reasons. In 2008, when China and India realized that Europe and the United States can no longer be the market of last resort, the last buyer for their goods. Whatever goods China produced, if the Europeans didn't buy it, the US market would absorb it. But that's no longer the case because the market in Europe and the United States collapsed. Where I live in Santiago in Chile, walking distance from my house are 6 mall chinos. Yeah, mall chino is where they sell stuff that they used to sell in the US market. Buckets and weird gizmos and 6 kinds of water bottles and 15 kinds of this and that. All the plastic stuff that you used to get at Walmart is now repurposed for the South American market. It's basically dumping goods because the US market just can't absorb that. Yeah? And so because of that, and because of, in a way, Trump's pretty rational tariff war, because he's trying to now revive the US market. He came to Asia, extorted Malaysia, extorted South Korea. He took 85% of South Korea's foreign reserves back to the US, 200 billion US dollars. Just took it from them. I don't know what he showed the president of South Korea. He must have had a CIA file on him and said, we have photographs of you doing this, this, and this, or bank account statements. You're going to sign this deal and we leave. Otherwise, we reveal this to the press. Same thing with Anwar Ibrahim in Malaysia. I don't know what he had on Anwar Ibrahim, but nobody knew that that deal, which was not a deal, but the extortion, where it was going. But because of Trump, India, Prime Minister Narendra Modi, personally, completely pro-United States, decided to go to Tianjin to the Shanghai Cooperation Organization meeting, not because he is either pragmatically or programmatically in favor of a rapprochement with China, but because the United States is pushing India close to China in the same way as the United States pushed Russia close to China. You may not know this, but Russia and China had a border dispute that was only settled 8 years ago. Only 8 years ago, during the time of Xi Jinping and Putin's meeting, they finally settled a border conflict that was going on for decades. So there is no reason why India might not next year settle a border conflict which is partly over an area in Aksai Chin, which is today a road that unites Xinjiang to Tibet, and nobody lives in that part of the map. No human lives there. It's just a road. And then in Arunachal Pradesh, there's a small area which is disputed, which can easily be settled with a boundary commission. Very easy to settle this. And as this is settled, student exchanges can increase, which they are already increasing between India and China. Cultural exchanges can increase. We can have an event in Delhi to talk about Wenhua. We can take busloads of Chinese intellectuals so that Indian intellectuals can interact with Chinese intellectuals. Indian intellectuals come to China so that people can talk to each other. Because, this is the beginning of the cultural process of creating a unity. If people don't understand each other, if they don't trust each other, if they don't meet each other, unity is not built through ideas. Unity is built through trust, through personal contact, through recognizing other people's strengths and limitations. You don't build unity by having a piece of paper with ideals that you can sign off on. Unities are built when there's much more people-to-people contact. And India and China contact ended in a substantial way a very long time ago. It should pick up. Well, the United States might help us by pushing India to increase relations with China. That could be a productive move. But even more so, and this is the really last thing I'm interested in sharing with you, even more so is the incredibly under-thought through issue of the fact that the center of gravity of the world of Islam, Darul Islam, is in Asia. In fact, if you add up the Muslim populations of India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Indonesia, it's 2/3 of the world Muslim population. It's insane. The largest population of Muslims is Indonesia. Second is Pakistan. Third is India. Fourth is Bangladesh. There are no West Asian or North African countries even near them. So why is it that when it comes to, for instance, Palestine, these large countries, if you include Malaysia, don't have a bigger say? Because it is not the case that Palestine is a Muslim issue, but it is also the case that there's a very large Muslim population there. And Jerusalem is a very important site that is shared by the different Abrahamic religions. And surprise, surprise, Palestine is part of Asia. Palestine is an Asian country. And Asian countries need to have a role in what's happening in Palestine. Israel is not a European country, even though Israel plays in the European Football League, and even though Israel sings in Eurovision, yeah, Israel is not a European country. It's on the Asian landmass, technically. And I think one other way to start conceptualizing unity is our relations with West Asia, the role of Iran, the role of Indonesia, of Bangladesh, and so on. Building an Asian consensus and pushing for a better situation for the Palestinians. You know, in fact, and I'm going to say this to deepen the provocation, if you add all the Central Asian countries together, you have a very large population of Muslims, much greater than North Africa. Yeah, also completely neglected. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization was created in this city of Shanghai by the Chinese government to deal with the Taliban in 1999, 2000, before the attack on the United States in September 11, 2001, because the Taliban was destabilizing Central Asia, including parts of China. It was a huge area of concern. Now the Shanghai Cooperation Organization is the largest Asian body because it includes India, Pakistan, Russia, China, Iran, and all these countries. It's the largest Asian body. So when we think, is Asia possible? Only if India and China settle what I think of as an anachronistic dispute. It's not really a border dispute, it's a dispute over trust. Only if they settle this. And secondly, if the SCO, which is a platform of Asian unity, founded to deal with a problem in Central Asia, starts involving itself in Western Asia, coming into some of these disputes, bringing a new political force into a dispute that is stagnated into a genocide, that could be very interesting as a unifying feature. Because, and here's the last line, because there's one thing that almost all of Asia is united on, which is horror at the genocide in Palestine. There's one thing that almost all of Asia is united on. Almost all of Asia is united on is horror at the genocide in Palestine.